Hello, welcome to PSR, People Speaking Rail, and we are those people. I'm Mike Baudendistel, head of Intermodal Solutions here at FreightWaves, joined as always by Joanna Marsh, who does the editorial writing at FreightWaves. Joanna, how are you today?
Oh, pretty good. How are you?
Very hot here in Dallas. So we're going to be talking mostly about Canada. The Canadian railroads have to clean up the mess that the ILWU-Canada made. So we're going to be talking about that. Wouldn't mind being up in Vancouver right now. I think it would be a lot nicer than down here in Dallas. So we'll come at this from a couple of different perspectives. First, I'll give some highlights of Lorianne LaRocca's article that's up on FreightWaves.com that you can go check out. I'll also there's her article just published as of Friday, so still up to date there. And then I'll go through some of the data that we have in FreightWave Sonar related to the strike on the ocean side and also the rail intermodal side. And then we're going to be speaking to John Schmitter at RailState, who's been on FreightWaves TV now a few times, and he has a number of interesting charts on both rail intermodal in Canada and also the rail carload business in Canada. I think can draw some distinctions between what is happening and has happened in Prince Rupert versus British Columbia, so it's further south in British Columbia in Vancouver. And so we'll do all that today. So it'll be kind of a Canada-heavy show. And for those who didn't see it, I would encourage you to go back and check out last week's episode, which I thought was a good one. We had a discussion with Chuck Baker. Chuck's the president of the Short Line and Regional Railroad Associations. Joanna, what was your maybe one or two takeaways from that discussion?
Yeah, it's one of those obvious things, but it was nice to be reminded how close the short lines are, or how close they can be to the shippers. So in a sense, the issues that the shippers were feeling in last year in particular with the service issues that were happening, that those same sort of pressure points or pain points were also being experienced by the short line. So I think that even though that's kind of a fairly obvious thing, but it's just nice, or not nice, but it was good to be reminded of that connection that the short lines have to the shippers, that to the extent that I feel your pain kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what sort of takeaways did you get from it?
Yeah, I agree with you. We don't talk about the short lines enough or how important they are. It's probably just because there's lots of little companies. Although Florida East Coast Railway might not say that there's so little. I think for me it's really on the service side where Chuck was talking about how service has improved, and I was pretty optimistic on the current crop of Class 1 railroad CEOs, that they're less driven by lowering the operating ratio, not playing the operating ratio limbo. How low can you go? What they're trying to do instead is maybe balance that those short-term concerns with concerns about growing the volume, delivering excellent customer service, and all of those things, which ultimately is in the best long-term interest of the railroads and the shareholders that maybe hold the shares for longer than a quarter. It was sort of taken by his optimism on service, and then he called out CSX as being ahead of the game, and at least ahead of the other railroads in terms of recent service improvements. So that's something that stood out to me. So encourage everyone to go back and check out that episode, which is available on the FreightWaves YouTube channel, like all the other FreightWaves television shows are. And with that, I'll just give a few highlights of Lorianne LaRocca's article for those who haven't read it. You can put that back up on the screen. They have some nice looking gantry cranes there, presumably from the port of Vancouver. We see the mountains in the background. So Lorianne, for those who don't know who she is, she's on CNBC, follows the ocean shipping industry very closely. And some of the highlights here is, she has talked about some of the diversions from going from the Canadian ports to the U.S. West Coast ports, and says, sort of with those comes, not only extra time, but also some extra costs. Is encouraged by there's not a lot of congestion at the U.S. ports right now. Says about 15% of U.S. trade arrives into the port of Vancouver, but sort of as a reminder that the port of Prince Rupert more of that traffic is for U.S. consumption, about 60% of the traffic that goes through Port of Prince Rupert for U.S. consumption. And then she goes on to talk about just how long the network might be impacted by the strike, which I think is on top of most people's minds. She cites the Railway Association of Canada, which estimates that for every 1 day of the strike equals 3 to 5 days of cleanup. And it was a 13-day strike from July 1st to July 13th. And so that equates, do the math, 39 to 65 days. Let's call it 6 to 9 weeks. So we hope it's not that long. Some of the other companies she cited, ITS Logistics, said there's about a 2-week backlog currently for containers at the West Coast ports, which will take at least 4 weeks to clear. So ITS was maybe a little bit more optimistic than the Railway Association of Canada. And then she has a quote from Eric Beyer, CEO of National Association of Chemical Distributors. And Eric says that rebooking through the U.S. West Coast for those that were, diverted traffic through the U.S. West Coast would take an extra 10 to 14 days because of extra ground transit time. That's a result of the redirection. I'm not sure exactly how it equates to that, but I thought that was an interesting perspective as. So it's not going to be solved overnight. It's kind of like when sort of any other railroad disruption, whether it's a hurricane on the Gulf Coast or a polar vortex in Chicago or a flood in Nebraska. It's just these things take time to get resolved. We also have a few charts in the FreightWave Sonar product I want to go through. So the first ones I want to go through are in the Ocean Container Atlas product, which is an app within Sonar. And so this orange line is a line of the Ocean TEU rejection index. So just like how truckload carriers can reject tenders, which are requests to move a load, ocean carriers do the same thing. And what you see here is this big spike in the orange line, and it went from the ocean carriers specifically in this sort of key lane, which is Shanghai, China to Vancouver. That rejection rate went from 7% before the strike. Now it's about 16%. So those rejection rates haven't come down. This is a daily data series. So those are still elevated. If you're trying to get your container on a vessel from Shanghai to Vancouver, that's available on any lane you want to see it in Sonar. Also have a data point on ocean TEU transit times. This is going to be a purple line if we can get that up. So this looks like kind of a flat line at a 30,000 point view. But if you look at it, sort of just the time from when the strike started, it was about, let's say, a 17 day transit time. And that became elevated to about a 21-day transit time. So that's a method called slow steaming, which saves fuel. But it's also like if you're just going to meet congestion at Vancouver, there's no real hurry up reason to get to Vancouver. You might as well go a little bit slower, save your fuel. And then we have one from Project 44, a red line here, which shows a big spike on ocean port pair delay. So we have a few different data series we get from Project 44, the folks in Chicago, Jet McCandless's company, and sees a big spike there in ocean delays. So this is going to be a port pair delay also from Shanghai to Vancouver. So the average delay was only about 2 days. So it was pretty close to getting on time. But that 2 days has become about 9 days. So those do seem to be about, let's call it a week plus, worse than they typically would be. So we have all of those things. Can look at that, as I said, any lane you want to see. And then also interesting chart here, which relates to what we're going to be talking about with John Schmitter on the rail traffic. So one of the data series we have in FreightWave Sonar from a company that processes the railroad waybills. And we break this down between international intermodal volume that's loaded, which is the white line outbound from Vancouver, U-shaped. This is a 7-day moving average, so would expect this to come up in the coming days. And then you have the domestic side of things. These are 53-foot containers. Now, keep in mind, Canada much more weighted to the international intermodal versus domestic when you compare that to the United States. And then domestic, it really didn't have as big of an impact, although it did have some. So clearly here, domestic intermodal, as you'd expect, not as dependent upon the ILWU longshoremen showing up for work. Joanna, is anything I missed from your perspective on this port situation before we get into John?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you covered it pretty well, and as you had mentioned, it'll be interesting to see how long it'll take for things to smooth out in terms of like getting everything kind of back to typical service metrics. And so and of course now you kind of have the peak season too, so so that's another dynamic that comes into play. So I thought it was interesting how some of the other movements, the non-intermodal goods, like such as coal and grain, I think kept moving throughout. So yeah, I mean, it'll just be interesting to see like how things get back to normal.
Yeah, I'd say that's the one thing I missed in that discussion was, this was really sort of a intermodal issue. Grain and coal, actually, some of those were actually up, which you talked about in one of your articles. So with that, would like to get into today's guest, which is John Schmitter. He's with RailState. So this is a company that has been on, John's been on FreightWaves TV a few times now, and you have a lot of interesting, data that you see in real time, really valuable to shippers. John, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me, Mike. How are you, Joanna?
Doing well. Yeah, great to have you. For those who are not familiar with RailState, why don't you give us just a quick overview of your company?
We think of RailState as providing the real network visibility, right? You can track your own rail car or your container in North America, but there's no network visibility like similar to what you would have with ocean shipping, airlines, and highways. Only basically the system average train speeds that they report that's a week old and required by regulators. So think of us as a Google Maps or Waze for freight railroads in North America. Get a look at every train and every car moving over every rail segment.
Yeah, railroad service metrics has really been a problem for some time. Like, it doesn't really matter what the average velocity was in the whole network a week ago. You really care about the segments that you're running over. So this is valuable for shippers. John, on your website, you have a number of articles that you posted as part of your blog that talk about the impact that you're seeing in your data on from the ILWU-Canada strike. You want to go through some of the highlights?
Sure. As you mentioned, the intermodal traffic pretty much dried up immediately from both the Port of Vancouver and at Prince Rupert. But as you also pointed out, the coal movements into Prince Rupert actually increased quite a bit, and that was a result of the both the CN and the Trigon terminals up there in Prince Rupert providing the capacity. So some volumes were shifted from Vancouver up to Prince Rupert. Grain also increased over that time period as well. I believe Canadian regulations required the port terminals and port labor to continue to handle grain shipments. So it's hard to say that the increase had to do with the strike, but there was capacity there. It seems like the grain folks took advantage of it. In Vancouver, coal still moved to West Shore terminals in Vancouver, but the other coal terminal there, Neptune bulk terminals, was on strike. So some of that volume shifted up to Prince Rupert. Some did, really, some of those sales were just essentially lost because of lack of capacity to move it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about your data too is, you talk about these individual terminals, and like that's one thing that we don't see. I mean, we use a different supplier. You're sort of collecting the data kind of firsthand, and like our supplier won't give it to us on the rail ramp level or like terminal level. whereas you can see all that detail because, or a shipper, you probably know exactly which terminal you use. To that level of detail is really important. And it is counterintuitive, at least to me, it's counterintuitive that some of these bulk commodities could actually be up because they use different rail cars. It's almost like, I guess maybe there's less congestion on, the main lines and those things, and they can move more in. But to me, I was surprised to see that, even with that being protected by the Canadian government.
Well, you could see that, definitely that, since the intermodal trains weren't running, right, the railways now, had some capacity available in crews and locomotives to handle other commodities, particularly crews. And so it looks like they were, able then to CN was able to handle that extra volume up to Prince Rupert in coal trains. Well, the grain trains were up, a lot of, by a pretty high percentage. It's not that many grain trains go there. So it's in terms of total volume, it wasn't a lot, but it looks like all parties involved did the best they could with the capacity was made available when the intermodal dried up.
Yeah, it does sort of lend maybe credence to the contention that it was really sort of been the crewing that has been the issue for a lot of the rail service issues the past couple of years, because the crew, that was one resource, is made more available because of that strike that was able to move some of that volume. I want to ask you also, John, some of this, what else are you seeing in terms of rail service that is maybe not evident from the publicly available, data that sort of what stands out to you in terms of what's happening with rail service?
Well, a couple things. One is one commodity we didn't talk about was potash, and the potash terminals in Vancouver at Neptune, and the other one at Pacific Coast Terminals at Port Moody were on strike. So that pretty much dried up the potash movements, and you saw both Nutrien and Mosaic. At least Nutrien. I'm not sure about Mosaic. Had cut back production because their export outlet Campotex had their main port at Neptune was on strike. Now they continued to move shipments to Portland, but they cut back production, and it's not like we talk about the railroads, and we talk about it. It'll be one day for every day of the strike, and trying to have 6 or 8 weeks, whatever it is, to dig out of it. I think that's it's really got to be careful there, because that intermodal traffic is going to start moving, and the railways, at least in the first few days, certainly look like they're moving to handle that container backlog at both Prince Rupert and Vancouver. Volume started to move immediately, and for the last day or two, it's been much higher than the average before the strike, at both in Vancouver and in Prince Rupert. But those as the traffic starts flowing, the crew supply isn't unlimited, so we'll see what the steady state is. But for the most part, the railroads are not going to have the capacity to move all of the, for example, of those backlogged potash shipments or coal shipments. And even if they did, I'm not sure the terminals would have the capacity to process it anyway. So that's volume that'll be lost to the economy of Canada.
Yeah, you bring up some good points there. I just have a good chart on there I wanted to show that you sent to us. Its title is Intermodal Leaving Prince Rupert by Train Eastbound. And if our production team could get that up there, I think it really illustrates what you were just talking about, which it went from about, let's say, anywhere from 500 to, yeah. So you see, beforehand it was about, let's call it an average of 600 containers leaving Prince Rupert on average, and then it goes to zero when the strike hits, and then it very quickly goes up to 900 to 700 a day. And so, you're right. I mean, all this traffic, I mean, when you talk about take a certain number of days to recover for how much to strike, it's kind of a rule of thumb, which rules of thumb are almost always, not granular enough to be important. But this seems like, the intermodal stuff is just more time sensitive than, let's say, potash or grain or something. So you would expect that this is going to be elevated for some time, I'd imagine.
Well, I think it'll be elevated until the container backlog is processed with the ships that have been waiting at the port. I don't know that the railroads have the capacity to move volume out of Prince Rupert or intermodal volume out of Prince Rupert or Vancouver at this level for any sustained period of time. But without affecting the capacity that's available to other commodities. So, I would point out if you're a shipper of anything but intermodal, I'd be careful and monitor this situation very, very, very closely. Because that the capacity that's moving this intermodal traffic is coming from someplace.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You'd almost be more.
It's a trade-off on priorities. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you'd almost be more worried now if I was a grain shipper or a potash shipper. I'm like, oh, are all the crews going to go to intermodals because that's it needs to be on the shelves for back to school, and back to school's here in a couple weeks.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's really the biggest use case our shippers have for our customers have for RailState data. Without RailState, there's no network view. You don't know what's going on there. And your own shipments may be having problems, but you don't know that the same capacity is being made available. Capacity didn't dry up. It's just that it's other commodities are being prioritized. And it enables our customers to have a more informed discussion with the railway about what's going on and what they can really expect. But the railways do the best they can with the priorities they have to fulfill. But if you're a shipper of any other commodity, it requires a decent amount of planning and understanding about what's happening out there, and that's what our customers do with the data that they get from RailState.
Mm-hmm. Joanna, did you have any questions for John?
Sorry, I had to go on mute here for a second. Let's see. I think kind of jumping over to the U.S. actually. You've mentioned that you have a lot of data in Canada. I guess how is the how are you progressing so far with collecting data from U.S. and if in sort of the 2-minute time slot, if you have these sort of thoughts on U.S. movements this fall, like in 1 minute or 2 minutes.
Oh, sure. We started in Canada for a variety of reasons, but we're starting to deploy sensors in the United States now to cover the U.S. network. We've located easements for about 16 sites now in between Southern California and Arizona, and we'll be expanding very rapidly in the U.S. So we'll be very soon be able to produce the same kind of data for U.S. movements, and it's right now our view. I mean, what we've seen at least in Canada, that railway service has been it's been pretty good for most of the year, and I think it's some of that you can attribute to total volume being down a bit, but I think we can expect to see some of the same things in the U.S. But we're looking forward to coming on soon and talk to you about the same kind of data in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you on again. Maybe we can work together even on sonar. We can maybe have a RailState sonar ticker. That would be great as well. Something to maybe consider. John, thanks so much for being on. How can folks reach out to you and RailState?
You can get us on our website at railstate.com. RailState is one word, or just feel free to email me at johnschmitter@railstate.com.
Great. Well, thanks, John. Hope everyone has a great day.